Okay, thank you very much, Camille. We will be looking at Module 4 this is the last presentation we're going to have on Part 3. If you have any question on the previous modules, feel free to send me an email. You're going to have my email at the end of this presentation. Sorry about that. This is getting to the end. We'll have to look at one question came up, and it's related to the emergency crossover to floor areas that was raised during previous module yesterday. And in order to address that, I want to refer you to 34618. Take a look at 34618. It's titled Emergency Crossover Access to Floor Areas. So in this section, in this article, it requires that doors providing access to floor areas from exit stairs shall not have locking devices to prevent entry into floor areas, from which the travel distance up or down to an unlocked door is more than 2 stories. So you have a crossover every 5 levels. So you should not be traveling more than 2 levels to reach an unlocked door, and you should not travel more than 2 stories down to reach an unlocked door. And this is you can put you can put electromagnetic locks on them as long as they meet the conditions of 34616 4 and 5. And you need to have signs on the stairways to indicate that they are openable from that side. And the locked doors, there's provisions related to locked doors under 34618.4, and it's and then with 34618.5, I think that's the one that you're interested in also, where access to floor area through unlocked doors is required by sentence 1. It shall be possible for a person entering the floor area to have access through unlocked doors within the floor area to at least one other exit. So if you come in through a door that has been unlocked, you need to have access to another exit from that floor area. At least one. So this is provisions for firefighters as well for occupants of the building in terms of circulation through the building and having access to different exits in the building, and it's also related to security provisions where people add more security between different floor levels occupied by different tenants, and they have those security controls in the exit stairs. So therefore, the code is coming in to address those situations and telling them, well, you cannot do that for for more under specific, and if you want to do it, you got to do it under specific conditions of 34618. So that's the crossover, emergency crossover access to floor areas. Another one that came up is, remember we talked about the table related to the exposure protection as well as the interpolation between the different areas of the exterior walls and that are for the exposing face, as well as looking at the areas as the interpolating between the distances to achieve to obtain the number of maximum permitted unprotected openings, the area of the unprotected openings. The interpolation based on the NBC approach in general, you can do both. In your province, you got to make sure that you know which one you can do. But in general, with the NBC, you can do interpolation going down and between the two, 4 based on the area of exposing face, and you can do interpolation based on the numbers between on the distances, the limiting distances that you obtained for them. So 2 ways of interpolations that can be done simultaneously to give you the maximum permitted unprotected opening for the exposing face. So these were 2 questions that we finished, and we can go on. There is quizzes for module 2, module 3, and module 4. Please do them, and if you have any questions on them, you can contact me on it. I think everybody that this most of everybody is going to be joining us for part 9, but in between now and then you can always send me questions on the quizzes and we can discuss them if you have any questions, and if we have time at the end of the module 4 we will take it, we will go through them. So again, the copyright information about the reproduction, distribution, and display and use of these presentations cannot be done. These slides are only meant to be cue points. They cannot cover all the requirements of the codes, and we can give you some information verbally related to some of these statements and some of their intents, but however, you need to go back, to reference back to the code provisions and the reference standards to apply this for projects. We covered in Module 3 the fire protection systems. We provided provisions for firefighting, and we provided egress and exiting, looked some of these aspects. We looked at occupant load calculation and exit capacity. In Module 4, we're going to look at the plumbing fixtures, barrier-free design, or accessibility. Barrier-free design, we really should be saying here accessibility because it's the accessibility provision under the NBC. We can look at the alternative solutions. We looked at objectives and functional statements also. We're going to go through that. So we have done all these occupancy, we've done a compartmentalization. I just repeat the whole concept for you to remember in terms of how we approach the codes, what we look at. We looked at occupant load, we're going to look at calculating plumbing fixtures, accessibility, barrier-free designs, existing buildings, alternative, which we typically, what we do for existing buildings, it's the code has covered it in third part 1. So in terms of calculating plumbing fixtures. Calculating plumbing fixtures, it's under 3.7, so let's take that right away, go under 3.7, and these are under the health requirements. So 3.7 cover health requirements, and if you look at 3.7.1, so subsection 3.71 addresses heights of rooms. So the height of rooms, the height of every room and space shall be sufficient so that the ceiling and ceiling fixtures do not obstruct movement of activities below. The unobstructed height of dwelling units shall conform to 953. So this is one provision, and for health requirements, it refers you to the height of a dwelling unit. It shall be in accordance with section 9.53. And then it goes in subsection 372, it goes to the plumbing facilities, and it talks about, except as permitted in sentence 2, the installation of a sanitary drainage system is not possible because of the absence of water supply. Sanitary privies, chemical closet, other means for the disposal of human waste shall be provided, and waterless urinals are permitted to be used in buildings provided with a water supply. So 3721, and then we go into water closets 3722. So 3722 article addresses the number of water closets, urinals, and how you can use urinals in lieu of water closets. And then you have also the lavatories in there, and it addresses also the numbers of plumbing fixtures for each type of sex, whether female or male. So in order to calculate do the calculations and estimate the occupant load, we need to do the number of persons for which the building or part thereof is designed. We know by now that for dwellings, it's the number of 2 people per sleeping room. For number of fixed seats for in areas, whether assembly places or other spaces, the number of persons for which the area is designed, or as calculated using the occupant load factor. So we measure the floor area in the room. We determine the use of all the floor areas. We either go to the design number, or we do the NBC factor, occupant load factors. We take the total area, divide the floor area in meters square, and that gives us the occupant. That gives us the number of occupants. The water closets to be provided in 3722 and 3723, water closets are to be provided assuming the occupant load is equally divided between males and females. So that's why we said before in module 3, when we're looking at subdividing population, we cannot subdivide 1 in half. And so we're going to round it to the pair number so that we can subdivide it equally between the two. Urinals are permitted to be substituted for 2/3 of the required water closets, except one urinal can substitute one water closet when 2 water closets are required. So if you require 2 water closets, you can use 1 urinal. And then in the other cases, so that's half. For the other cases, it's 2 urinals are permitted to be substituted for 2/3 of the required of water closets. One lavatory is required for 2 water closets or urinals, and at least you need to have at least 1 lavatory with 1 water closet. Before we go to location and design, take a look at table 3722A. So table 3722A. It tells me about the number of water closets for an assembly occupancy, and it takes the number of persons for each sex, and it provides me the minimum number of water closet for a range of numbers. So if I have between 1 and 25, I need 125 people. Of the male sex, I need to have 1 water closet for a group of 25. Between 25 and 50, I need still 1. If I go to 51 to 75, I need 2 water closets for the male sex, and I need 3 water closets for the female sex. And then we go on to 3722, 7, 8, 9. They address specific occupancy. So the number of water closets for primary schools and daycare centers shall be at least 1 for every 30 males and 1 for every 25 males. And then sentence 8 addresses the places of worship and undertaking premises. 1 water closet for each 150 person of each sex. And 9 looks at detention and treatment occupancies. These shall be based on the needs of the occupancy. And at least 1 water closet for every dwelling unit. So the code does not require more than 1 water closet in a dwelling unit, no matter the number of bedrooms in it. The code just tells you provide at least 1, and you're done to comply with the requirements of the building code. And then it's table 3722B. If you look at it, then you have provisions related to group B occupancy, and you can take it from there. If we're looking at water closets, in terms of location and design, washrooms are required to be made available for all occupants of the buildings. They do not need to be provided on the same floor level as the occupants they are intended to serve, provided all occupants within the building have access to the washroom facilities. So you can now provide washrooms you can provide washrooms in the building on any story, on any floor level, as long as the people have access to them through the building. So if you have a floor level that can be accessed only from one area, it does not have access to the washroom, that floor area needs to have its own washroom. The code is flexible, and you need to be cognizant of this allowance for washroom locations. Any shelf or projection above a lavatory is not permitted to become a hazard. So there is specification related to lavatories and projections in it. Where a washroom contains more than water closet, other provincial codes may require the doorway of the room not to be located so that the water closet, urinal, or lavatory can be seen from the entrance. So this is for privacy. You cannot just design a washroom and you can see from the outside the water closet directly when the people open the door. So of the room. So this is something not in the NBC, but this is a note put for you in as a cautionary remark for other provincial occupancy. So that is not a requirement of the building code. The privacy of opening into the washrooms. Hotel bathtubs. Bathtubs are required 3729. Bathtubs, where the bathtubs are installed. So the code doesn't tell you to install them, but it says where they are installed. They are required to have 750 millimeter clear widths along the front entry, lever type faucets with no spring actions, grab bars to handle a load of at least 1.3 kilonewton. Open along the top with no rack at the rim. To have and then you need to double check the barrier-free shower requirements for bathtub designs. So these are basically addressing the bathtubs for hotels and motels. If we want to double check the provisions for bathtubs, the grab bars, we have the provisions for grab bars under 3728. 3729, we have bathtubs. And they've got all the provisions related to it under 3729, and it refers to grab bars of 3728. Calculating the number of water closets. This is an example based on personal for business and personal services occupancies. So if we have more than 50 people, we start with 3 plus 1 additional increment of 50% for each sex and is in excess of 50. So we start with 3, and if we go to 100, we add 1 more. So that's 4. And I have an occupancy group. What section is the location of washroom? Oh, the code is silent on it. It doesn't tell you where to locate them. And therefore, that's why you need to be addressing.
Oh, sorry. I meant when you mentioned they have to be located on a floor.
If you provide them, that means they need to be accessed. If you provide them and they cannot be accessed, then it's useless to have them. Okay. So we're looking at the health requirements 3.7. Is that okay, Morgan?
Yeah, I kind of meant the clause that you mentioned that was they need to be on, or they can be on another story or another floor, but I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah, it doesn't say. The code doesn't tell you where they are.
Okay.
So where to locate them? But it requires you to provide them.
Yep.
But you need to be cognizant that if you're required to provide them, don't provide it for half of the building occupants, and for those occupants that do not have the access to the washrooms or to the areas where the washrooms are located, then you need to address separate washrooms for those people. And this is what we're saying, is that the code tells you to provide them. As a designer, you need to be cognizant of the fact that it doesn't tell you where to locate them in the building, so you have the flexibility of where to locate them. However, make sure that you're accounting for everybody in the building to use them, and if they don't, make sure, and because they're gonna have to use them, make sure that they have access to them. Does that make sense?
Yep, thank you.
Okay. So I've got a group T NBC. So we know that the table 3.1.17.1. We divided the number of people. We divided in 2. So we rounded up. It's 76 male and females. We go to the table 3722B in terms of number of washroom for that office. I'm assuming this whole office is going to be this area is 1400 square meter. The whole area is 1400 square meter. Let's just assume that it's all the yellow, okay? So all the yellow requires 3722B. Let's take a look at, so I've got 76 and 76. So what do? I have 50. Over 50, 3. I have 3 minimum for each sex. 1 for additional increment of 50 for each sex in excess of 50. So I have over 50. 3 male water closets. Again, let's take a look at it. 76 So I have over 50. I start with 3. Did I exceed 100? No, because it's an increment of 50. So I'm still under the 100. So what's my requirement? It's 3 water closets for each sex. 3 female, 3 male. Is that clear? Any question on this?
I have a question in terms of barrier-free water closets. Are those in addition to the minimum required on those lists?
Okay, so you are required to have a barrier-free water closet within a washroom. So that can be part of the ones that you can use in the building. And even though it's not required, but you can do a universal washroom in the building, and if you do it, you can account for it, and it's 3722 allows you to do that. If a single universal washroom is provided in accordance with the requirement 3.8, that is, it's designed in accordance with 3.8, 37222 tells you the total number of persons in the building used to determine the number of water closets to be provided is permitted to be reduced by 10 before applying the requirements for number of water closets. So, as you will see in the accessibility part of part 3, we need to have barrier-free water closets within our washroom. They are part of the counts that accommodate the people. In addition, if you use a universal washroom, you can decrease the number of occupants in the building by 10. And then you can, and based on that reduced number, determine the number of washroom that you're going to be requiring to have in the building for the female and male. So there's 2 things related to accessibility that impact your counts of washrooms. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So in unsprinkled building, there is one section of the code that looks at accessibility. It's 3.8. However, outside of that section, there is one area that looks at protection and accessibility and protection of an accessible path of travel in non-sprinkled building, and that's in Article 3317. So Section 3.8 provides guidance toward designing and requirements basically related to barrier-free accessibility throughout the building, and tells us where they should be applied in 3.821. But in 3.317, you need to protect the area. And that section, if we are in Article 3, sorry, that's Article 3317. Let's take Article 3317. Okay, can you please go to Article 3317? This is the only area. If a lot of people wonder about protection. I mean, do we have to provide? Do we need to design our exits for accessibility? No, our exits are not designed for accessibility because people are that the code does not address it, and this is something that's being looked at. But at this time, the code does not tell you to design your exits for accessible exit of the building. You need accessibility for entering your building and using your building. That's what you need to design. There's one area, the one exception is protection of floor areas with a barrier-free path of travel when in a building that's not sprinkled. So you will have to use an elevator. You need to provide an elevator. You need to provide for dividing the area in zones, 2 different zones. This is an option. You can sprinkler it. You can have an exterior exit at ground level. You can have balconies that can then provide for residential dwelling units. So the 3317 is interesting, but with that, it goes away once you sprinkler a building. In this case, you have you're considered protected from an accessibility protection, that most buildings that are sprinklered are afforded a very high level of safety, and therefore the code does not address it. It only addresses it for unsprinkled building, and Article 3317 tells us to do it, and you need to provide, in this case, a pressurized elevator, separate the floor into 2 zones, 2 smoke-tight zones with fire rating, so 2 fire compartment. We provide a balcony for residential buildings, provide an exterior exit at ground level, and have a ramp leading to ground level. So all these elements are for protection of barrier-free. Other than that, we will not see those kind of provisions in 3.8. So 3.8, it's really about designing for accessibility to the building. And in 3822 tells us that not less than 50% of the building entrances are required to be design free. So if you have multiple entrances, so 50% of them, they have to be barrier free. Walkways and bridges that connect barrier free stories must be designed to be barrier free accessible. 3823, it discusses the barrier free path of travel from a parking space, accessible parking space, to a designated barrier free entrance, to and throughout the entrance story, and to and throughout all normally occupied floor areas that are served by an elevating device. One thing I didn't go over, and I want to make sure we go over it, is where is accessibility barrier-free design, and that is right at the beginning of section 3.8. 3.8 tells us, I want to read it for you. 3.82, the requirements of this section apply to all buildings except detached houses, detached, semi-detached houses, houses with secondary suite, duplexes, triplexes, townhouses, row houses, and boarding houses. So this may be different in other local building codes. So the NBCC exempts townhouses, row houses, boarding houses, triplexes, duplexes, semi-detached houses, and houses with a secondary suite. It also does not apply to Group F Division 1 major occupancy, industrial high hazard occupancy. So barrier-free accessibility design provisions do not apply to them. And buildings that are not intended to be occupied on a daily basis or a full-time basis, like telephone exchanges, pump houses, substations. So if any building that is not occupied full-time or on a daily basis, similar to the concept of those telecommunication exchange, telephone exchanges, pump houses, and substations, those places are not occupied. They do not need to be designed as for accessibility. So that's in 3821 related to the application. We're still talking about barrier-free path of travel. We need exterior access to parking. 3825, access to parking areas and exterior passengers loading areas. We have at one level of indoor parking, at least passenger loading zones. Access aisles of not less than 1,500 millimeter wide with 6 meter long adjacent to vehicle pull spaces. Curb ramp to be provided, and a clear height of not less than 2.75 meters. And there's explanation materials in Appendix A in the note at the end of Part 3. It provides guidance on accessible parking space sizes where local regulation and bylaws do not govern the provision of barrier-free parking spaces. So this relates to parking. Barrier-free, again, we're still in barrier-free path of travel. It's required for all buildings. Barrier is not required to specific rooms and areas like service rooms, janitor rooms, attic and roof spaces, and mezzanines without a passenger elevator serving that floor area. So that's under access required to providing a barrier-free path of travel. That's in 3823. 3832 goes into the dimensions of the barrier-free path of travel. 920 millimeter unobstructed width, all public corridors. All public corridors and primary aisleways are required to be 1.1 meter wide. And so this is a note that I was put in there to remind us that when we're designing for barrier-free path of travel, there is minimum dimensions, but we should not be forgetting the minimum dimensions of other parts of the building code, like in part in section 3.3, when we're looking at fire protection and fire safety design of floor areas, there is minimum requirements for width of corridors and aisleways. So we have to be cognizant that the minimum requirement barrier-free do not trump other sections. They work together, and you apply the most conservative depending on what the element of the barrier-free path of travel you are dealing with. You must include ramps, elevator to overcome a change in floor level. They need to be stable, firm, slip resistance, and with thresholds. If you have thresholds, you need to have them no higher than 30 millimeter and beveled so that they do not basically provide obstruction for the barrier-free path of travel. I'm not sure if we designed lay-by spaces, space for passing or resting, where a barrier-free path of travel is longer than 30 meter. A lay-by space of 1.5 by 1.5 meters is required at every 30 meter intervals. And this is a typical requirement. You will find it in all barrier-free path of travel provisions. Ramps, any floor slope greater than 1 in 20, 5% is required to be designed as a ramp. So these are the ramps. You see the handrails, the guards. If you see the sign, 1 in 12, the gradient needs to be maximum 8% or 1 in 12. 870 millimeter wide between handrails, and level area of 1.5 by 1.5 at the top and the bottom of the ramp. So this is different than just the 30. You need to have 1.5 by 1.5 at the bottom at the top of the ramp. And a level area of 1.2 meter times width of the ramp at every 9 meter intervals. So the ramp is a little bit different than flat floor areas, barrier-free flat path of travel. So this is in 3835. So you've got exterior walks in 3833. You've got loading zones in 3834. You've got ramps in 3835. International symbols for accessibility must be provided at entrances, washrooms, showers, elevator, parking facilities, and for facilities with people with hearing disabilities. You don't require signs everywhere. However, you need to use the international symbols for accessibility at those locations. Controls for the operation, automatic controls for the operation of building services or safety devices intended to be of the building. These controls need to be operable by the building occupants with one hand located, and they need to be located between 0.4 and 1.2 meter above the finished floor levels. As we look at the controls, let's take a look at the controls 3826. So 3826 tells us, except as provided in 35213, controls for the operation of building services, safety devices, including electrical switches, thermostats, faucets, door hardware, intercom switches that are intended to be operated by the occupants and are located in or adjacent to a barrier-free path of travel shall comply with section 383. So these are all the controls in the barrier path of travel. And 383, it tells you where to look, where to locate those controls. So 3838. 3838 tells us controls, and this article has changed in the 15 edition. Controls described in this section shall, where located in or adjacent to a barrier-free path of travel, unless otherwise stated, shall be mounted 400 millimeter to 1200 millimeter above the floor, be adjacent and centered on either side the length or the width of a clear floor space of 1.35 by 0.8 meter. So you have a clear space next to them, and they need to be operable with one hand in a closed fist position without requiring tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist. So you need to be able to use them with a tight fist position, unless otherwise stated, with a force of not more than 22 newtons. So these are the provisions related to controls where they are required, and 3838 tells us where to look, how to place them, and dimensions around them.
Amal, the dimension of the height, 400 to 1200, seems quite extreme. At 400, it's pretty low to the ground, wouldn't it be?
I mean, it depends on you've got different type of people with accessibility issues. You've got people who are shorter than others. You've got people, we've got children in wheelchairs. You've got you've got people who are hunched over. So different accessibility issues, and the way they designed it, they put it at those levels, right? So the code gives you the range of where to put them. And in some cases, if you are working with daycare centers for children with special accessibility issues, then it makes sense to have it at that lower distance than the upper distance. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, doors and doorways, 3836. 800 millimeter clear door width measured from the inner face of the door to the innermost latch. So that's your clear width. The hardware is openable with a closed fist mounted between 900 and 1100 millimeter above floor level, AFF, above floor level. Unless equipped with a door operator, you can have a 300 millimeter latch side on the push side. That the door operator is located 600 meter on the latch side on the pull side with the door maneuvering clearance. So if you're coming to the door and you're opening and you've got the control and the door is, you push the door to the inside to open it, you need to have 300 millimeter clearance on the latch side. If you're opening the door to the pull side, you need to have 600 millimeter clearance. Door width plus latch side, width of the barrier-free travel serving the door. So this is the door maneuvering clearance, how much you place in front of the door, how much clearance you need to have in front of the door. The width of the barrier-free path of travel serving the door, so which is 920 to 1500 millimeter max perpendicular. So on the perpendicular is parallel to the door, you need to have the door width along with the latch side long. And in terms of the width, you need to have 900 to 1500 millimeter. It's the width of the barrier-free path of travel serving that door. Vestibules, there is provisions related to vestibules, 1200 millimeter to be provided between two doors in a series. So these are examples. This is the clear width of the door. And this is the door is opening. If you're opening to the inside, you need to have 300 millimeter clearance here. If you're coming from this way, you're opening towards you, you need to have 600 millimeter clearance here. And again, you will see this, what's the intent of the 600 and the 300 millimeters. This is from the appendix of the code. It gives you some provisions. The good things about accessibility is that they provide a lot of explanation to that. Assembly seating need to be situated so that clear and level, and side approach 900. So it's like how you approach them. You need to have a space of 900 by 1525. And if you approach them from the front, you need to have 900 by 1220. Side by side, adjoining a barrier-free path of travel. and situated as part of the design seating plan to provide choice of viewing location, unobstructed view. You could keep in mind that if you're providing barrier-free seating, you want to give the same options for barrier-free seated clients as you would provide to other viewing clients. So if your patrons who require accessibility, they need to have different areas of the theater to be provided so that they can view it from preferred locations. So, and then once you do that, you need to provide an unobstructed view for them, depending on what that is located. Assistive listening devices are required in assembly areas with areas of more than 100 meters squared, and it needs to encompass the entire seating area, unless you use the induction loop, in which case that it's only half of the seating area. So here you've given different options for seating. Designated spaces are side by side. So here you're given an option from this side and from this side. This is coming from the approach side, and this is coming from the approach side. This is coming clear level space of 900 are for front or rear approach. Is here. There's no seat megaverage on the egress routes. So you want to make sure that you have sufficient clearances and aisle width that would be required for egress. So the design of theaters for those types of for seating is already a subject by itself in 3.3, but 3.3.2. So that talks about seating arrangement for the theaters. But you gotta talk. When you're doing accessible design, you have another level of scrutiny in design areas to be addressed in terms where do you put your designated accessible seating, and as you're doing, how do you access it? You have enough space to it? Am I obstructing any areas with it? So these are all things to think of when you're designing for barrier-free access. Plumbing facilities. Washrooms required to be barrier-free plumbing facilities. All washrooms located in barrier-free path of travel. Where water closets are required by subsection 3.72, at least one barrier-free water closet is required to be provided in the entrance story, unless a barrier-free path of travel, BFPT, barrier-free path of travel, is provided to barrier-free water closets elsewhere in the building. The water closets required by 372 are for dwelling units only. So at least one water closet is required, unless you provide them on the building entrance on the entrance level of the building, unless you provide them somewhere else in the building, and you don't need them for washrooms that are for serving dwelling units only. Where alterations are made to existing facilities, universal washrooms are permitted in lieu of multi-stall washrooms. So, and we saw that provisions for universal washroom, if you want to add them, you can do that. However, you decrease the amount of occupant load by 10, and it accounts for, and that way indirectly it accounts for some, at least 10 people to be using them. Washrooms not required to be barrier-free. Washrooms are not required to be barrier-free, provided this is in 3828. They are located within residential suites or care suites. There are other barrier-free washrooms located on the same floor level within 45 meters. So there's your condition. You need to have 45 meters, another washroom that has barrier-free washroom. Or they are located in an individual suite, less than 500 meters square, and completely separate from and without access to the remainder of the building. So if the suite is less than 500 meters squared and it's separated from the rest of the building, and it's of occupancy group D and EF, then it does not require a barrier-free washroom. This drawing is not, I mean, you should not take it for literal. The barrier-free washroom may be located somewhere else, and it's less than, it needs to be located within 45 meters to the barrier-free to the washroom. So you need to have the barrier-free water closet or washrooms. Multi-stall washroom 38311. At least one water closet stall is required to be barrier-free. Where there are urinals, at least one is required to be barrier-free. At least one lavatory is required to be barrier-free if you have multi-stall washrooms. For universal washroom, if you provide them, they need to be designed with 38312. If you read 38312s, it does not tell you to provide them. And if you provide them, then they need to be in accordance with 38312. And water closets need to be designed with 38313, urinals 38314, lavatory and mirrors 38315, showers 38316, bathtubs 38317. Let's take a look at bathtubs because we get questions on that sometimes. Bathtubs required by 382811. So only those bathtubs that are required by 382811. And 382811 we just saw where a bathtub is installed in a suite of residential occupancy, it's required to be barrier-free. It shall comply with 383. So where a bathtub. So again, these are the bathtubs. And 382811 tells us where a bathtub is installed in a suite of residential occupancy that is required to be barrier-free, it shall comply with section 38.3, and in this case 38.317, it needs to be located in a room of a clear I'm reading 38317, to be located in a room with a clear floor space of not less than 1.5 in diameter, to be not less 1.5 meter long. It have a clear floor space of not less 0.75 meter wide adjacent to its entire length, and it needs to be capable of being accessed along its full length with no tracks mounted on its rim. So there's requirements for the bathtubs. So barrier-free washroom design. This is an illustration of the provision of 38312. You get the 1500 circulation space. You get 900 clear next to the water closet. You've got the door, the clearances, and you've got the clear space next to the for the lavatory.
I got a question.
Yeah.
For universal washroom, so does it mean that it's not automatically be designed as barrier free?
No, the universal washroom by definition is barrier free, and it's got specific designs because it's used by both sexes. It is designed in accordance with 38312.
Oh, okay. So it's barrier free as well.
It is barrier free, yeah.
Okay.
But if you
Thank you.
provided that, the special thing in like this is a difference between the NBC with the rest of the with other codes, provincial codes, is that universal washrooms are not required by the NBC. But if you provide them, you design them to 38312.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So there's provisions also related to counters, shelves or counters for telephones and drinking fountains. If where these are provided, then you need to have them. So counters required by 38211.1 shall have at least one barrier-free. Shelves or counter for telephones, if you provide them, 38211.212. So if you go to 38211, because this one is really saying about required by, but let's double check what is required. 382. Okay, where mirrors are provided in a barrier-free washroom, that at least one mirror shall comply with subsection 383. Does that say that the mirror is required? Does that say that the mirror is required in a barrier-free washroom? I'm reading 38288. Somebody? Someone? It's okay, you're wrong or right? We're both learning.
No, it's not. It's not.
No.
No, right. So they're not required. Where drinking fountains are provided, at least one shall comply with subsection 383. So when you are providing them, at least one shall comply for the drinking fountain, not all of them. If you provide a mirror in a barrier-free washroom, then the mirror needs to meet the requirements of 383. Let's see, where you have showers provided in a building, at least one shower in each group of showers shall comply with subsection of 383. So be careful when you're reading the provision of 383. Do not read them alone for those appliances. You really need to go back to 3828 and double check whether they are required at the first place or not, and how much is required before you start designing all your appliances for barrier-free. Is that clear? Okay, we're gonna go to existing buildings in this section. If you're looking at 1111, Article 1111 in sentence 1, it is not intended that the NBC be used to enforce the retrospective application of new requirements to existing buildings, unless specifically required by local regulations or bylaws. So the NBC, it's not used to enforce the retrospective application of new requirements to existing buildings. And that's the typical of every code, building code, that you're not, every time you have new requirements, you're not going to go out and do retrofitting to the new requirements of the building code. The successful application of code requirements to existing construction becomes a matter of balancing the cost of implementing a requirement with the relative importance of that requirement to the overall code objectives. So this is retrospective application of the NBC to existing buildings. However, we know that the NBC applies according to the same article, the design and NBC applies to the design, construction, and occupancy of new buildings. It also applies to any alterations, reconstruction, demolition and removal, relocation, and occupancy of all existing buildings. So if you're doing alteration and reconstruction, then you start looking at the NBC. If you're doing demolition and removal and relocation and change of occupancy of a building, you need to look at the NBC provision to address those changes. It's pretty straightforward. It's typical of every code that they apply in terms of application to existing buildings. Guidelines from Part 3 of the NBCC to existing buildings. In the design and construction of the new building, all requirements of the NBC must be complied with for the new buildings. In the case of existing building, the degree of compliance with the current edition with the NBC will differ, obviously. And in existing buildings, it'll be extremely difficult, in some cases impossible, to meet current building code requirements. And that brings us to the other section and the final section. It's related to alternative solution. How can we achieve compliance? Typically, alternative solutions are looked at when we're looking at modifications, renovation of existing buildings which do not fit, which do not unnecessarily, we cannot comply 100% with the building code, or we're designing a system like we want to put some to design features like interconnected floor spaces that are protected in accordance to the code, or connecting multiple floor levels on other than the first story and the second story, or we're putting like features that that do not fit within the building code construction limitations. And this is why we go to alternative solutions. And these are mentioned in Part 1, Division 1. Then in 1.2 compliance, it looks also at the notes to Part 1, where we're looking at the notes to Part 1, where we're looking at the compliance explanations. So I put the arrows here for you, is that always read the general application of the code in terms of how the code is applied. At the beginning of each section, you need to look at the first elements of that parts that will cover all the rest of the subsections and sections in that part. In the compliance, we'll take a look at 1.2 shortly. Application of Division C is related to to what it applies to. And we'll take a look at that. Reference documents and organizations. We looked at that. These reference documents are basically the standards that are referenced in the building codes. If you are going to be using a standard that is not listed as one of these standards, you will require an alternative solution. Notes to part 1, that's again, it's clarification notes to the code requirements. Division C applies to permit applications, structural specifications, reviewing of work, alternative solutions. And how to begin an alternative solution, which is really a variance from what building codes require. You look at the attribution tables, and I'll walk you through that shortly. You look at the attribution tables of Volume 1 of Division B, Part 3, Section 310. So you go to page 3174 and you look at all the objectives and functional statements associated with Part 3. And then you create a rationale, risk analysis, you document it, you document all your assumptions and limitations, and submit it to the building code official. You comply. So in terms of compliance in Division A, Section 1.2, you can comply with the building code directly. So you apply with the applicable solution of Division B, or you can use alternative solutions that achieve at least the minimum level of performance required in Division B in the areas defined by the objectives and functional statements and attributed to the applicable acceptable solutions. What is an acceptable alternative solution? It's any solution that's not an acceptable solution included in Division B of the code. And you can see in Division C, Section 2.3, and the notes, it addresses alternative solution and how to document them. Can alternative solution be used? Yes, alternative solution be used when and building officials do allow them, do consider them and review them regularly for projects. Alternative solutions, a submitted document that demonstrates the alternative solution is a document demonstrates or a calculations that demonstrate the proposed alternative solution complies with the intent of the objectives and the functional statements of the code. The document substitutes for the acceptable solutions the prescriptive requirements of part of Division B, in our case, Part 3 and 9, or it could apply also to Part 4, 5, 6, so depending on what provisions of the code you're dealing with. In our case, we're dealing with Part 3. And the proposed alternative solutions and related designs must meet the specific intents of the acceptable solutions. They must be documented and verified by the local authority, and the evaluation and demonstration of the acceptability of the solution relies on risk analysis methodology. The verification, you do that in code compliance, you look at code analysis, you provide text results, your hazard of risk or risk analysis, you provide engineering analysis, you provide mathematical computer modeling to validate and verify your alternative solution. You can use previous approvals on similar areas. However, there is restrictions about using similar alternative solution from one project to use it on another project. However, if you know that the local official has already considered this, you can state that this solution has been already applied in this jurisdiction for similar types of buildings. So it's not to be validating, it's just as another element to make the local authority aware of what you are doing, that there's a precedence to it. So, and when you're referring back to other codes, you have to be very careful. Like you cannot refer to the OBC specific section that allows something when the OBC had other provisions that relate to that section and make things more rounded. So that when you're cherry picking from other codes to validate an alternative solution, that is not an alternative solution. That is called cherry picking, and the local official is not going to accept it and should not be accepting it. So it's really, you need to do the analysis. You need to provide the information, the technical information to validate your requirements. So before it's 4 o'clock, I just wanted to show you quickly, if you allow me, something here, Teams. Sorry about that. I'm gonna be putting the code up here. Can you see it? Division A. Hello? Can you see it?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I'm going to walk you through Division A, compliance objective and functional statements. Okay? The table of content. It's not like. All right. So as we said, always look at your table of content. So 1.1, section 1.1, general application of the code. Section 1.2 is compliance. 1.21, compliance with this code. And 1.22, materials, appliances, systems, and equipment. 1.3 is division ABC. You've got 1.4, the application of all these divisions. And then we look at 1.41, definitions of words and phrases, symbols, and other abbreviations. And then we have reference documents and organizations, plus the note at the end of the NUT part. The code applies to both site-built and factory-built constructed buildings. The farm buildings shall conform to the requirements of National Farm Building of Canada 1995. So the building code does not apply to farm buildings. You need to go to National Farm Building of Canada. You need code applies to both this code, the NBC applies to site-built and factory-built constructed building. There's specific standards that factory constructed buildings and components must meet, especially from quality assurance perspective. And in terms of compliance, in 1.211, you either can comply with this code, complying with the applicable acceptable solutions in Division B, or you use the alternative solutions to achieve the minimum level of performance requirements. Hi, Kurt. Thank you for posting it. Are you posting the farm building or the guide?
I posted the guide.
Oh, thank you, Kurt.
You're welcome.
So, Kurt, for everybody's benefit, on the chat window, Kurt posted a copy of the 1995 guides, which got nice explanations. Be careful when you use it. The explanations need to, some of the code provisions have changed. However, the illustration of the concepts remains the same. Okay? So let's see. I wanted to go take you to the terms and abbreviations. We saw that. I want to go to the functional statements. And you see the reference documents, and this is the notes to part 1, compliance. There's a whole discussion on factory constructed buildings. You've got a CSA standards that apply to factory constructed certification of buildings. We looked at the different application of reference documents. This is clarification when the code references documents, standards, that you need to make sure that you're looking at the right additions. The objectives. So the building code, when it was first written, they did not have objective and functional statements. They actually wrote the code and developed a whole list of objective and functional statements for it. And that was a huge exercise over a number of years. And finally, it was published. And that allowed us to have a basis by which to judge any alternative solution to a prescriptive requirement in the code. So we said that they set about putting down all the objectives of every, well, not every, almost every requirement of the building code and put the functional statements associated with those requirements. So what are these? The applications 2.1, this is part 2, objectives. It applies to all buildings covered by this code. Applications, it applies to all buildings covered by the code and only to the extent they relate to the compliance of this code as required in Article 1211. So it's only to the where the building code applies, this is when you apply it. This is simply put. What are all these objectives? You've got objective OS 4, objective of safety 4, objective OH3 is it's health, related to health, noise protection, only applies to dwelling units. Resistant to unwanted entry applies only to dwelling units. OH5, hazardous substances. So health applies to hazardous substances, apply only to extent is defined in the plumbing code and the fire code. Objective OA, accessibility, does not apply to detached houses, houses with secondary unit, duplexes, buildings of group F1, buildings that are not to be occupied on a daily or full-time basis. OE, so objective for environment, does not apply to buildings of residential occupancy, to which Part 9 of Division B applies. Buildings containing business or personal services or mercantile or low hazards. So these are the buildings to which it applies to. So it applies to residential occupancy to which Part 9 applies. It applies to business and personal services, mercantile buildings, low hazard buildings F3, to which Part 9 applies, and whose combined area does not exceed 300 square meter. Interesting. So even though that Part 9 applies to those buildings up to 600, but the objective of environment applies only for those buildings up to 300, and buildings containing a mix of residential, non-residential occupancies that are described in this sentence. So some of the objectives are, and this is where we go in a definition. The objective OS, it's the objective related to safety. An objective of this code is to limit the probability that as a result of the design, construction, or demolition of the building, a person in or adjacent to the building will be exposed to an unacceptable risk of injury. So under objective of safety, we have multiple objectives. One objective of safety relates to fire safety. And under the fire safety, we have multiple sub-objectives, which show safety from fire explosion occurring, fire explosion impacting areas beyond point of origin, collapse of physical elements due to fire explosion, the fire safety system failing to a function because of a functional failure, and OS 1.5, if person being delayed or impeded from moving to a safe place during a fire emergency. So this is under the objective of safety, we have the first objective is OS 1 is fire safety. Underneath it, we have multiple sub-objectives related to different conditions of hazard conditions. Another safety objective is OS 2, which is the structural safety. Under structural safety, again, we have sub-objectives. Load bearing of the building elements exceeds that of the load. The loads bearing on the building element exceed those that the element has been designed for. This pertains to Part 4, design, structural. Safety in use, OS 3. So when you're using the building, you want to be making sure there's no tripping, slipping, falling, contact hazards, like when we're looking at the guards and the rails, the obstructions, contact with hot surfaces or substances, contact with energized equipment, hazardous substances. So when we're looking at hazardous occupancies, there's provision related to that. There is some provisions also related to in part 6 related to HVAC systems. Let's see. Resistance to unwanted entry. We said this applies only to dwelling units. Safety of construction and demolition site. An objective of those codes applies to construction and demolition site. And we have all these different provisions that apply to it. And then we go after the safety objectives, we have the health objectives. We have indoor conditions, sanitation conditions, objective related to noise protection, and we have objective related to vibration and deflection limitations, hazardous substances containment. We have OA, the objective related to accessibility, OA1, barrier-free path of travel, and OA2, barrier-free facilities provision. OP is fire and structural performance of the building, so it's protection of the building in terms of property protection. Fire protection of the building, OP1. You want to protect, an objective of this code is to limit the probability that as a result of the design of this construction, the building will be exposed to an unacceptable risk of damage due to fire. The risk of damage due to fire is addressed in the code are those caused by fire and explosion, those fire and explosion impacting. So you will see that those same objectives are similar, sub-objectives are the same. However, the protection starts applying to the building, property, whereas when we're looking at health and safety, it's about people. When we're looking at OS, it's safety of people. When we're looking at OP, it's safety of the building and the structure, basically. So we're looking at structural sufficiency of the building. We're looking at protection of adjacent buildings from fire. We're looking at protection of adjacent buildings from structural damage. OE is the environment. Its objective of the code is to limit the probability that as a result of the design of the construction of the building, the environment will be affected in an unexpected manner. So the code provides for specifications and prescriptive requirements that addresses this objective of environment protection. And energy efficiency and resources protection is addressed under the environment protection, which is OE1, and this is there relates to energy efficiency of the buildings, and the objective is to not use excessive use of energy. So these are the objective statements, and you've got a whole note section on objective. It's that note, basically the term emergency addresses two words. The term building is used in the wording of the objective. It's reserved to the building for which compliance of National Building Code is being assessed. And the emergency is, in this case, fire emergency. In OS 37 5.9, it addresses any type of emergency that required rapid evacuation of the building, such as a bomb threat or the presence of intruders. So when you're looking objective statement OS 37 359, you're looking at any type of emergency. For the rest of emergencies, you're looking at fire emergency. Functional statements. Again, this part under this section, you will look at the functional statement that have been identified, to which they apply. Look again here, the application of functional statements, and then the definition of functional statements. Luckily, we don't have as many functional statements as we have objectives. However, there's a long list of them that we need to address. So we don't have sub-functional statements, we just have functional statements. So we've got functional statements to minimize the risk of accidental ignition, limit the severity effects of fire explosion, and to retard the effects of fire in areas beyond the fire origin, and etc. In terms of provisions related to fire safety, we're basically looking at, you're seeing a lot of them here related to fire. Let's see. I think it's up to 36. Let's see, to limit the level 33. I think 33, it's where we have fire emergency response, notify emergency responders, timely matter, the need to take action in emergency. So these are all functional statements that we're going to use to identify what is the objective and the functional statements of a certain code statement. Why did I go through all these for you? Because I'm going to show you right now the provisions of objective and functional statements that have been identified, because when you're doing an alternative compliance, we need to compare the performance level of the alternative compliance for our building with the functional statements and objectives associated with the provisions that we do not comply with. So if you open at the end of part 3, go to the end of part 3 and take a look at the tables that give us all the functional, and these are the attribution tables. Table 3.1.10.11. This is the attribution table for the different provisions of part 3, objective and functional statements. I'll see if I'm able to get it quickly for you here on screen. You guys see it? What page is it? Thank you, Amber. Good. 174, 3174. So if you look at the table of content of part 3, you will see, you keep going, you keep going, you keep going. At the end of part 3, you will see, objective and functional statements. If I want to find any objective and functional statement associated with any provision of any of my parts, I go to the end and I will find it for part 3. It's under section 3.10. I go to section 3.10, and I'm gonna ask you a question. Tell me about the functional statements and objectives related to Article 3164, clearance to flammable materials. Article 3164, can you please type it in the chat? Article 3164, clearance to flammable materials. Find me the functional statements in the table and objective statement associated with it. Nicole, that was quick. Good, good, good. Dan. So we have F1 OS1, F3, yeah, F04. Where? No, there's no F04. Ben, you need to double check where you're looking at. F03 OS12, that's correct. There's also F01 OP11, and there is F03 OP12. Perfect. Thank you, Noel. F03 OS 1.2. Good. Okay. Then you go to the definition, you know what these, and then you go, you need to go to the part 1 and look for the definition of these objectives and what they mean. And then when you're putting your analysis related to alternative compliance, you want to double check that this is part of the analysis that you need to look at. Okay. So if we see, so let's keep in mind our objective and functional statements only for alternative solutions. Maybe as a designer, you probably sometimes you're looking at a provision of the code and you're looking at it from the perspective, from your design perspective, and you say, why is the code saying I have to do that? And you want to know that it just didn't make sense for you. And once you take a look at the objective and functional statements, it might make sense to you from that perspective. I think the only reason and the only time that we're going to be using them as to document for the alternative provisions of alternative solutions, and we need to document them because that's part of the documentation requirements. So once you document what F01 and OS11 is, so we identified F01, minimize risk of accidental ignition. What is OS11? And what is OF03 and OS12? And OP11, OP12. So you need to identify each one of them. And the way to identify them is go back to part 1 and look at the definition of each one of those. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay, great. And now we have identified those provisions. And we're gonna go back into the building code to the division C, because we know we identified division C in terms of some of the roles and requirements related to alternative solutions. So please go to the division C.
Can we kind of put together functional statements and objective in one sentence to kind of have better understanding what it means?
Can we put them together in one sentence so that you have an
Yeah, I
understanding?
mean, yes.
Okay, let's take a look at one. So if we're looking at F101 OS11, okay? I'm gonna go back to my definitions. I have the code in front of me, and it's not easy to navigate here, but let's do that. Page up quickly. So we're looking F01 OS11.
If it's easy, I can read it for you, and then I mean we can put them together. But it's just I think we need to kind of understand what's the meaning of that, putting the functional statement objective together.
Okay.
F01 is to minimize the risk of accidental ignition.
Yeah.
And OS 1.1 is fire or explosion occurring.
So to minimize the risk, I have to look at it together together. So F01, it's F01 is to minimize the risk of accidental ignition, and then we looked up OS11. Okay, an objective of this code, OS11, is to limit the probability that, as a result of the design or construction of building, a person or in or adjacent to the building will be exposed to an unacceptable risk of injury due to fire. The risk injury due to fire addressed in this code that are caused by fire or explosion occurring. So it's the risk. It's basically looking at OS11. And the functional statements minimize the risk of accidental ignition and causing an OS11. So these are two together working together.
So when we state the objective, we have to kind of have this general note and then the more specific one.
Yeah, that we
comes
don't
right
not
after.
want a person or adjacent to the building would be exposed to an
Okay.
acceptable risk
Yep.
from the accidental ignition. So if you want to provide for another standard other than the one specified in the code in terms of or another performance, another type of conductor, I'm not sure what was that specific requirement for, that you're going to be providing the specific provisions to minimize the risk of accidental ignition in order to address the objective of safety, which is related to safety of people from a fire occurring as a result of that accidental ignition. Okay? Page number of objective statements, I'm looking at 2-2. Functional statements are on 3.1 and 3.2. Okay, so let's go to division C. Division B. I gotta get my second book here. Just 1 second. So under Division C, take a look at, so open the second volume. At the end of the second volume, let's take a look at Division C. Where is that? 9, 8, 3, 6.
I have a Division C in my volume 1. Is that not correct?
It's located in my volume. I love my code book. It's got all these different locations that I'm missing a page, and I'm missing in my division. Let's take a look at it again. In Division C, let's see here. It should be here. We're gonna go back all the way down. Just bear with me. Oh. Doesn't go quickly. So these are the attribution tables. And as we're going through this, remember that there's part 8 related to safety measures at construction and demolition site. So that's something to be aware of. So 841, as you see, as we're going through this section of Division C, I need to show you. Okay, good. Where did it go? Let's see here. So if you have asked somebody to make sure to copy certain sections for you, and they have copied it for you so that you can use it from home, make sure to double check things to see that it's all completed. That's what we get with COVID these days. But as long as we have electronic copies, make sure you have electronic copies of it so that you can use it. And let's take a look at Division C, the table of content. Part 1, Division C, administrative provisions. Part 1, it talks about definitions, applications, symbols, and abbreviations. Similar to Part B, application, definitions, words, and symbols. So application of Division C, this applies to all building covered by the code. It's non-defined terms. So the terminology shall have the meaning that are, so if the term is not defined, the code tells you it shall have the meaning that is commonly assigned in the context in which they are used. taking into account the specialized use of term by various trades and professional to which the terminology applies. So you need to look at the context of which it is used. Where objective and functional statements are referred to Division 2 in Division C, they shall be objective and functional statements described in Part 2 and Part 3, in Parts 2 and 3. Okay, where acceptable solutions are referred to Division C, they shall be the provision stated to Part 3 to 9 of Division B. And this one, I think this one needs to be, it's missing the statement of Division B, and so it's also in Division B. The word alternative solution are referred to a division in Division C shall be alternative solution mentioned in clauses 1.11b of Division A, which we saw it. So now we can go to administrative provisions. And Part 2 administrative provisions, it's looking at 2.3 alternative solutions. And this is where you need to look at alternative solutions in terms of requirements for documentation related to compliance. So go to section 2.3, please. I have to use this because it's not in my code, and it is here. Let's see, section 2.3. Are you guys in section 2.3? All right, so documentation conforming 2311. Documentation conforming to the subsection shall be provided by the person requesting the use of an alternative solution to demonstrate that the proposed alternative solution complies with this code. So all the provincial codes who have taken the Division C and modified it, however, you still find the same requirements for alternative solution submissions. The documentation referred to in sentence 1 shall include a code analysis outlining the analytical methods and rationales used to determine a proposed alternative solution which will achieve at least the level of performance required by clause 12111b of Division A, and information concerning any special maintenance, operational requirements, including any building component commissioning requirements that are necessary for the alternative solutions to achieve compliance with the code. So this tells you minimum requirements of performance evaluation with analytical methods, document the rationales, and also document any special maintenance and operational requirements to make sure that the components will function as they're proposed. And also in 23113, sentence 3, the code analysis referred in clause 2A shall identify the applicable objectives, functional statements, and acceptable solutions. So this is where it comes in. The code analysis shall identify the applicable objectives, functional statements, and acceptable solutions. You got to identify the code requirement that you're going to be doing an alternative to. You got to identify the functional statements and objectives associated with it, and any assumptions or limiting or restricting factors, testing procedures, engineering studies, or building performance parameters that will support your code compliance assessment. It shall include information about the qualification of the experience and the background of the person who's preparing it. And it has to have sufficient detail to convey the design intent and to support the validity, accuracy, and relevance and precision of the code analysis. And where the design of the building includes a proposed alternative solutions that involve more than one person taking responsibility for different aspects of the solution, the applicant for the permit shall identify a single person to coordinate the preparation of the design, code analysis, and documentation to refer. So you may rely on multiple studies, but you need to appoint one person to submit it. So that's the information related to alternative solutions documentation. It has a note to it in 8231. We can take a look at it. Documentation of alternative solutions. It talks about most jurisdictions require that a building be maintained in compliance with the codes under which it was built. Alternative solution made possible by objective-based codes may have special maintenance requirements which would be described in the documentation. And there is a whole slew of provisions, clarifications. And there's a study that was prepared by the CCBFC on related to recommended documentation related to alternative solution. So with that, this gives you an idea what the alternative solution does, what documentation you need to do it, who's supposed to prepare it, and who can submit it. One person designated for the purposes of permit by the owner. And the alternate solutions, basically, you need to have alternative solution needs to document the code sections that you don't comply with, the code references that you don't comply with, and include all the compliance assessments with the intent of the performance statements and objectives related to it that we have seen before. So does that clarify for you the alternative provisions and documentations and objectives and functional statements, why we use them for the building code?
I only have 311 in revision C. I don't have the rest of this.
You don't have?
Can you show me the page? Yeah, where's
this one? You don't have that?
I only have this page, and then the rest of it is not there. Can you show me where's?
Oh, the notes?
The page. Oh, these are in the notes?
These are notes, yeah.
Okay.
It comes right after it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Unless you have the same problem as I have, and then you're missing a section. Okay.
Can I ask a question? I
Go
was
ahead.
just wondering, I don't know, I mean, how much experience you have when it comes to alternative solutions, but what format would you suggest when you're submitting your alternative solutions? Like,
okay,
that's
a pretty easy one. There is a proposed formats on some jurisdictions have put on their websites alternative solution in terms of how the format or a template for alternative solution, how to be submitted. But typically what you can do, you fill out the submission form and attach to it a report. And that report, it's where you document all your the code, your solution. I know Quebec has a template for alternative solutions, probably in other provinces they have also. But you state the problem, you state what the code requirements, you describe your building. Initially, of course, you have to describe your building and your condition, and then you describe the code section that you're dealing with, what are functional objectives and functional statements and objectives associated with it, why you cannot meet it, and how you intend to meet it, do the analysis, demonstrate how they meet the objectives, the intent of the code in the functional statements, and state the limitation and conditions section where you address some of the elements that your alternative solution is not going to work unless those things are put in place. All that it can be done in a report. Sometimes, depending on the alternative solution, it can be done in a letter version. But and some provinces require professional engineers to do it. Most of the time, it's related to code compliance and based on practices, proven best practices. You can see that the alternative solution is signed by an engineer or an architect.
Okay, thank you.
And there is different formats. Typically, you've got one for the fire code and one for the building code. Okay, any other questions on alternative solutions, objective, functional statements? Okay, we can close this. Here. Teams. I'm just going to go back to the presentation to make sure that we have part 3, module 3, module 4 here. Thank you for your patience. I think we are done here. So what we have done is we have covered it goes back to the beginning when you turn it into presentation. So we go to the end here. So we have done this. We covered those doors. We looked at alternative solutions. We looked at the requirements in terms of the analysis, the documentations. And so in this module, we covered the health requirements. We looked at plumbing fixtures, 3.7. We looked at barrier-free design, 3.8. We looked at existing buildings. We went back to part 1. We looked at alternative solutions, which are allowed under part 1. And we go to division C to look at the requirement for alternative solutions. We looked at objective and functional statements, which would be in part 1, and then addressed as part of the alternative solution documentation requirement. So with that, we have completed the material for this course, but you can ask any questions at this time, or we can go into the quizzes and you can take a look at the quiz and ask any questions. Go ahead.
I did have a question when it comes to doing renovations within existing buildings. So does the NBC prescribe like any kind of area limitations? So when it comes to, say, you're doing a renovation that exceeds like X percentage of a building, you would then need to bring the entire building up to the current code requirements?
Unfortunately, no, the NBC does not do it that way.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I know that the OBC has it, and the Quebec code has it, but not in NBC. Other questions? Is there any specific area of the code that you would like to cover? We went surprisingly today. It went faster than the other days, so we still have just 15 minutes. We can cover with it any areas that you would like to address. Would you like to take a look at the quiz for module 3 and module 4?
Actually, I did have one question maybe just before we look at the quiz. In one of the earlier modules, we were talking about mezzanines and exiting from mezzanines, and specifically like if the floor area or the meters squared overall for the mezzanine exceeded a certain amount, it would trigger us having to provide an exit from mezzanine level, whether that's 1 or 2 exits. I was wondering which portion of the code we would need to refer to that would define the requirements of whether 1 or 2 exits from the mezzanine would be applicable.
Okay, take a guess. Can you take a guess? What we went over them today. So you're looking at what? And your question is relevant to what?
That would be for safety within floor areas. So I would assume that it would be starting at 331.
That's mezzanines. But what else are you looking for? You're looking for egress or exiting?
Right. So that would be under 3.4.
Exactly. So under 3.4. So you guys, you see the thinking about how you, it's like when the question is asked, it's it's mezzanine, but I'm looking about exiting for mezzanine. So where would I look for exiting for mezzanines? In under 3.4. And under 3.4 is exits. And where does it talk about the number of exits and provisions for criteria for exits for mezzanines? That would be under 3422, means of egress from mezzanine. Okay, and the table is table 3422.
I see it now.
You see it?
Yes.
Okay. Can we cover, I will write the quiz later as I did it yesterday. Oh, okay. Can we cover Appendix C with climatic and seismic information? We're gonna cover that because part 3 is related to fire and it does not address climatic provisions. That will be, we'll look at it with part 9, okay? Seismic information, you need to look, that's again, it's as it relates to part 9 and some of the provisions, seismic provision relate to part 4, which is structural. So we haven't looked at it. I would love to help you with that, but again, we need to take a look at the part 3 provisions. Any other questions related to part 3?
I have a question.
Somebody raised the questions that they wanted to know about. Let's see. I think we covered all the questions that looked at the crossovers. Yes, we did that. Okay, that's it. And did anybody have a question related to doors? I don't remember it.
Can I ask a question?
What was that?
Oh, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question regarding, I think it's subsection, it's 3131 sentence 2. It's regarding to that major occupancy fire separation, and it's a note to separation between group B and E. On the table, it's written 2 hours, but then on the section 2, it's an exception that it's written like if not more than 2 dwelling units are contained together with the group E, it can be like 1 hour, the separation. So I have a question, like when it says like 2 dwelling units contained with a group E, is it like on the same floor or it's on the whole building?
In the whole building.
It's in the whole building? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Amal, do you mind going over the door sizes? We went over exit widths and so on.
Yeah.
I don't know if we covered the actual door size. Did we do that already? Did I just kind of?
I think we did. We went through it a little bit. I was trying to be quick and efficient today, and I think I went a little bit too quick. But we did cover it. Yes, the doors for the exits. But we can go through it again. I'll take a look at the section. In 3.4, we've got dimensions for exit widths and doors. So if you go back to 3432. In table 3432, it gives us the minimum requirement for minimum width of exit corridors, passageways, ramps, stairs, and doorways in group A, B, division 1, C, D, E, and F. So minimum doorway width is 800 millimeter. And for the stairs is 900 if it serves not more than 2 stories, 1100 if serving more than 2 stories above the lowest exit levels or more than 1 story below the exit level. The ramps is always 1100. Exit corridors and passageways is always 1100. So for doorways, it's 800 millimeter. And if you are in Group B, Division 2 and Division 3, and this is where we get the higher dimensions. For Group B, Division 2, doorways are not for areas that are not resident sleeping rooms, it's 850. Where they are serving resident sleeping rooms, it's 1.05. And that's for Division B2. In Division B, Group B Division 3, it's 850 for all of them, whether it's a resident sleeping room or outside this resident sleeping room. We've seen that it actually we've given page up. We had it. It was summarized in the presentation. Yeah, let's see here. Oh, it's in the other presentation in module 3, wasn't it? Because we had the exits and exit widths and egress in module 3. Sorry about that.
I have a question kind of on the same topic.
Yeah.
It was in the quiz.
Okay.
Now or?
Yeah, you can ask now. Yeah, we have still time. Yeah.
It was question 9. It was very straightforward. The minimum corridor widths and treatment facilities are required to be, and there was 4 options. I got this one wrong. I don't know. So they picked the 1100 based on the table 3432B, but it wasn't the correct answer.
Okay, so exit corridors and passageways, or is it a corridor?
No, just the minimum corridor widths.
So a minimum corridor width in a group B2. Do you think it is? Did you go into the provisions of 3.3 for corridors, areas, and related this? So in fire safety provisions on floors, did you check 3.3.3 to see what the corridor width, if any, is specified in it?
I did. I'm just going to read it again to make sure that I didn't miss anything.
Yeah. So the question was relevant to corridors and not to exit corridors. And we are in a B2 occupancy. On a B occupancy, what would be the widths of the corridors that it is required? So that's specific to the provision, specific to the occupancy. And we know that there is specific provisions related to occupancies in 3.3, and the corridor widths would be either 2400 millimeter when you're moving patients, 1650 where the corridors were not used to move the patients, and in buildings with more than 10 residents when the corridors serve the residents. 1100 when you don't have more than 10 residents. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
perfect. You're welcome. Okay. Just for special industrial occupancies, design of hazardous areas, you know those. 3.4 exits. At the end of part 3, you keep going till the end of part 3. You see that we have the 310 is objective and functional statements. We have 3.9 specific provisions related to self-service storage buildings. This is a whole new section that was added in there. So 3.9 is the self-storage buildings. At the beginning of part 3, there is specific provisions related to requirements for general types of buildings and construction provisions. Double check those. I would double check the ones at the beginning of 3.3 and 3.2, as well as 3.1. So these are all, always double check the application and the general provisions of each and the scope and definitions within each section that you're starting to look at.
I have a question, please.
Go ahead.
Is there any resources to identify the documents to file alternative design solutions?
Can you please repeat the question? I did not get it.
Are there any resources to identify the documents and information required to file an alternative design solution?
Oh yeah. I mean, as I said, we looked at Division C tells you what documentation you need to do and what kind of analysis you need to do, right? So that's in Division C. But the local authorities also, they have, and the submission requirements, because it's part of the permit submission, they have alternative solutions requirements, what you need to submit, what forms you need to submit with them. So that's for submission requirement. And then it depends on the analysis you're doing, what kind of documentation you need to pull together that goes beyond what the code requires.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
Just going back to the previous question about the corridors, the table 3432B.
Yeah.
For Group B, Division 2 says 1100, right? As we stated, and then you referenced the section 3.3.3 corridors for Group B.
Yeah.
And I believe it says 2.4 and then 1.65 meters, depending on the conditions. I just wonder why it's such a discrepancy in terms of exit corridor width and just a regular corridor. Because we are kind of funneling people from wider corridors into more narrow. I know this is a minimal requirement, but kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah, actually, there's other provisions in the code related to the B2 occupancies where you have to subdivide the areas into maximum. Subdivide the floor areas into zones, different zones, and fire compartments, and then you can move people from one zone to the other and that's why we have. You remember when we talked about the fire alarm, single stage or two stage. And when you're doing two-stage alarm, you can and you can start moving people, and then you have them in a separate zone, and then you can look at it that way. The exits, the provisions for the exits are not for accommodating people to stay there. It's for evacuation, and that's the way the code looks at those aspects. However, in terms of circulation and movement between zones and one zone and other zones, that's why your corridors needs to provide the sufficient width of circulation.
I understand that, all of that, as you said, in compartments and safe zones and so on. It's just kind of moving from a larger corridor where you can accommodate a larger number of people into something that's more narrow, that constitutes exit. Kind of that doesn't seem to fit according to my logic, at least.
Yeah, the exit corridors are similar to exit stairs. You're not going to put patients down the exit stairs with their beds, right? So, and the exit corridors are similar to it's exactly what they are. It's similar to exit stairs, except they're flat, and they are not designed to put in people on gurneys inside of them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. There is a lot of areas of the building codes and the design of buildings that is not addressing areas related to what do we do with people. However, for hospitals, it is divided in zones, and they have the protected zones and protected areas within the building that they move patients around until they get them to safety. So in case of fire emergency, and they have those flexibilities. The code does not, this is one area of the code that doesn't, maybe it's a borderline, it is addressed. And the other one is that we're getting accessibility into the buildings, but we don't have any accessibility to get out of the building. That's another area that the code should be working on too. And they're working on another farm building that we should be seeing that coming out. And so a lot of new things coming out on the codes. In terms of, we're coming out to the end, it's 5 o'clock. We have looked at part 3 of the building code. Most of you are going to join me for part 9. And if you have any comments in terms of modification to how the approach of the presentation, to the interaction with you, with me, between us, give me your comment, give me your feedback. I really appreciate it. This is we're improving on this with you guys being the first to experience this type of presentation in this type of format. And of course, with technology, we have some glitches, but we worked them up at the beginning with the presentation in terms of going between one screen to the other. I got my code problem in terms of not having one section not provided in it, and that was a major technical problem for myself. I'm going to have to address it, but I need you also to comment on other areas that you need to that we need to improve or change to make it more facilitate the process for you to acquire the information and to help you in succeed in your in pursuing your examination and your practice. So I would really appreciate your feedback, and do give it to on the feedback forms for the RIAC. If you have any questions, you have my email, atamim@johnsonhughes.com. You can find me and send me those questions, and I'll try to address them for you as much as I can. Okay? And thank you for your participation.